To install a heading on a rocket motor, I've got the bulkhead drilled 1/16 of an inch to 1/8 inch into the delay of the motor, so the fusing from the heading will be nicely embedded down into that delay comp. I actually installed some separate fusing down into that pacifier hole, just coming up to some bent black match, just coming up to the top of the motor. It's about that long there. I'll put a couple pieces like that in there to ensure really good flame transfer up into the void at the top of the motor that's going to ignite the heading fusing. So now I've got nice secure match down in the pacifier hole through the bulkhead of the motor. That fusing from the heading can go down into the top of that motor about 3/8 of an inch. This is just quick match, black match fusing going into the rocket heading. I don't want any time fuse, any delay in the heading itself. When that motor passes fire, I want the heading to go. If for some reason I did want some delay in there, like when I use a tube busting salute, then I will put a little bit of time fuse going into the rocket heading. And I just want to expose the black match going into this particular heading. Come on. There we go. And observing my hot glue gun safety tips, I didn't just hot glue. I'm going to hot glue that heading onto the end of the motor with the two black match fusings next to each other. That ensures really good positive fire transfer to the heading. So turning my hot glue gun power off, I'll go ahead and put a nice bead of hot glue around the top of the motor tube, making sure to not put so much on there that it's going to obstruct the fusing or the fire transfer. Sort of mate the black matches up and just press that onto the rocket heading, and then I'll just reinforce that joint with a little extra fillet, nice fillet of hot glue. Once that's cool, that heading will be nicely attached to the rocket motor. And that's all it takes to attach a heading to a motor. Now to attach a stick to the rocket motor, which is the last step in getting this rocket ready to fly. Stick dimension, I typically use a stick that's about a half a tube ID wide. This tube is 1/2 inch ID, so I would use a 1/4 inch stick. 1/4 inch gets a little flimsy. 5/16 is about the smallest I actually end up going with. So this is a 5/16 inch square stick, and I'll cut it to length. This is starting off at about 30 to 36 inches long, but I'll cut it off to balance the rocket once I'm done. I eyeball the stick to see if it's curving, and it is just a little bit. And I put the curve so it's going under the rocket motor, so that when the rocket takes off, this rocket will actually try to fly around the stick, since it's on one side of the stick. Between air resistance and the thrust of the motor, it'll try to fly around the stick. Well, if the stick is curved that way a little bit, that counters that tendency of the motor to try to fly around the stick. And so I usually put the curve, if it has any of the stick, if the stick has any curve, curving in toward toward the motor axis, under the motor. So that's like that. And then I will put a little bit of an aerodynamic shape on the top of the stick like that. So when that's curving under the rocket motor, that bevel allows air to flow over that just a little bit better. It's not a big deal. I'll put a little white glue. I said that previously that hot glue doesn't stick very well to these rocket motors, so I'll put a little white glue on here. Attach the stick. And I could either use tape. I kind of like the look of a couple string ties on there. I'll put a couple clove hitches around the motor to hold the stick on there and allow the glue to dry. The white glue, the one added benefit of the white glue is that it will allow that stick to be adjusted so that it's running straight with the axis of the motor once I get the string ties on. You know, you see a lot of guys just attaching sticks to motors with masking tape, especially these slow takeoff black powder motors. A few wraps of masking tape would work just fine, or slightly stronger tape like strapping fiber, reinforced strapping tape would work just fine. Now I'll just eyeball down the axis of the motor to make sure that it's running true, that the stick is running true with the motor so it flies good and straight. And that looks good and straight there. Once that glue dries, that stick will be nicely, firmly attached to the rocket. Now, one last thing is balancing. How long a stick should I have used? Sometimes I'll even use 2 sticks, especially on larger rockets. Where should this rocket balance? You'll hear sometimes guys say that it should balance down here, right below the nozzle of the rocket. If I'm flying a rocket without a heading on it, if it's just a rocket motor like that, then indeed I do balance it about down here. With a heading on there, I'll balance it halfway up the rocket motor, or if it's a big heading, I'll even balance it 2/3 of the way up the rocket motor. So balancing this about halfway up the rocket motor, I can remove some of this stick. You can remove just a little bit more. And that's balancing pretty nicely right about in the middle of the rocket motor. So I would say that that rocket's going to fly just fine. The stick serves 2 purposes. One is to keep that rocket heading the direction I want it to fly long enough for it to build up speed as it leaves the launch tube. So the stick has to be long enough to go down into the launch tube to allow that amount of time for the rocket to build up speed to fly straight once it leaves the launch tube. And then also it acts like the feathers on an arrow, or the fins on a dart, or a regular finned rocket. It provides stability during flight. So that's the 2 purposes the stick serves. So that rocket there is ready to put into a launch tube and fire up.